Anyone else? And then once you've got your Bible open, Ruth chapter 2 is where we will be at today. Yikes. And it's an excellent chapter. We've got lots to learn here, lots of lessons in this book, or in this chapter specifically, well, in the book, but in this chapter also. And so let's see if we can get through all of it. Let me show you what I've done with Ruth chapter 2. I have broken this up into two main divisions, the first being gleaning, verses 1 to 17. We'll talk about what that means. And then good news in verses 18 to 23. And we will find ourselves beginning, of course, at the gleaning section, right at verse 1, where our story from chapter 1 continues. In the event that you were not here last week, we started Ruth. Ruth is a young lady who has traveled back to Jerusalem with her mother-in-law. Ruth, her father-in-law died, her husband died, and her brother-in-law died. And so now it's just her and her mother-in-law, and they've traveled back to Bethlehem, and they are starting life there, new life there, and we will see all sorts of things happening in this chapter, lots of good lessons. And so let's get right into it with this first section on meeting the needs. Now we'll pick it up in verse 1, and then we'll get into verses 2 and 3 where we will see meeting the needs. There was a relative of Naomi's husband. So Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law. Okay, so you got Ruth, the main character in our story, and then her mother-in-law, Naomi. And Naomi had a husband, but he died. His name was Elimelech, and that's what we're getting here in verse 1. There was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. Now that was Naomi's husband, who's now dead, but he was related to Elimelech. And we're told here in verse 1 that his name was Boaz. Now in chapter 1, we were introduced to Elimelech and his two sons and his wife. And then there was two daughter-in-laws that came and married the two boys. He had 6 people. That started us out in chapter 1. And before we even got halfway through the chapter 1, we were down to 3 because the husband died. Actually, all 3 of those husbands died. And then we were down to 2. We were left with 3, and then we were down to 2 because one of the sisters-in-law, Orpah, she left and went back to her family. And this young lady, Ruth, said to Naomi, her mother-in-law, "No way I'm leaving you. In fact," she said, "I'm following you all the days of my life. I'm going to be buried in the same place that you're buried at." I mean, she was committed. So what we called that was love declared. Okay, so she was declaring her love for her mother-in-law, Naomi. Nothing weird going on there, just family love. She says, "I'm going to be with you until the day that we die." She never used the word love, but she was committing herself and saying, I'm declaring my love for you. Now, what we see in Ruth chapter 2 is that love is now demonstrated. The love that she expressed in chapter 1, she is now going to demonstrate that in chapter 2. And so here we're introduced to this guy, Boaz, and he'll become a very important part of the story. Now, in verse 2, as you can see here, meeting the needs, this is Ruth. Ruth is meeting the needs. What needs? Verse 2. So Ruth, the Moabitess, she was not an Israelite. She was a Moabite, different people. She said to Naomi, she's speaking to her mother-in-law, and she says, "Please, let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Now, let me tell you why I called this meeting the needs, and we'll read verse 3 in just a moment. But this is because the reason that Ruth is going out to glean the fields, the heads of grain, and I'll talk about what that means in just a moment. The whole reason she's going is because it's Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. They're back in Bethlehem. But they don't have any men now in their family to work and to provide for them. So now they're on their own, and they need to go out and get some work done and scrape some food together. Well, it would appear to us that Naomi is on the older side and probably not able to go out and work hard. Now, maybe she's doing something else from the house, which is wonderful. But Ruth says, well, hey, let me go out and I can work the field. And so, she decides that she's going to go out and do what? Meet the needs. Okay? Now, keep that in mind. Ruth is actively loving her mother-in-law by going out to work the fields. And it says in verse 3, then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. I'll explain those things in just a moment, but before we go any further, she's going to the field to do what? She's going to the field to glean heads of grain, okay? That's what we were told in verse 2, glean heads of grain. Now, gleaning, what does that mean? Well, that's a word that we use to describe gathering something. However, it is not fully gathering everything that's out there on the field or in the field. Gleaning would indicate for us that she's going to go out and take a small amount of whatever she finds out there in the field. That's gleaning, just taking a small amount. Now, why is she doing this? Well, because they need food. But what gives her the right to just go out into the field and go start taking, heads of grain? Well, this was actually built into, it was part of God's law, what we call the law of Moses. Some of you have been here for a little while on Sunday mornings. You've been through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy with us. And you may remember that part of that law that we found there that God gave to Moses was gleaning. And what God did was he set up a welfare system for his people. They didn't have a government welfare system where they could go and apply or whatever and get that kind of food and assistance. So what God did was he said, listen, when you are picking your crops, whatever the crops are, when you've grown something and you're going to go out and gather the produce of it, he actually told the growers, he said, you have to leave the corners or the edges of your field. Do not pick from edge to edge. Now, let me give you an example. Today, modern times, we have tractors, we have farm equipment, and when something needs to be picked, we will send out somebody driving farm equipment, and they'll go and clear it. They'll just every bit of whatever's on that field, they're going to go and clear it. Even if, because we still have people that go out and pick by hand, right, certain crops, even if they're going out to pick by hand, they're given instructions that they need to clear the entire field. Don't leave anything because we need that, we need to sell it, we need to make money with it. Well, at this time, again, God had set up this welfare system where when you go out to pick your field or to clear your field, leave the edges. And the whole reason for that was to allow those who were poor and in need of food to go out after the reaping had been done, and they would find some extra there and they could go and gather enough for what they needed. Now, this gleaning was for me or you or whoever needed it to go out and get just what they needed, not a lot. They couldn't go out there and clear all the edges and then take it to the marketplace and sell it. They were allowed to go and gather what they were going to eat. So that is what Ruth is going to do. And so Naomi gives, her approval. Yes, go, tells her at the end of verse 2. And I love here that she says, rather in verse 2, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor. Let me go find a field with an owner that will allow me to glean in their field. Keep in mind that this is happening during the time of the Judges. You and I just got done finishing the book of Judges. And we know that during that time, what were we told? There was no king in Israel, so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So there was a lot of wickedness taking place. So it's possible that she could have gone out, even though it was the law of God, she could have gone out to a field and somebody could have said, hey, get out of here. scrounge. You're not getting anything off of my field. So she says, let me go out to the field and find someone that is nice enough to let me glean. Okay? Now, verse 3, she left. She gleaned in the field after the reapers. Reapers. Oh, Halloween's coming up this Friday. The Grim Reaper we think about. And that Grim Reaper always holds a sickle. It's usually, if it's Halloween time, they've got a long handle with that curved blade on it. And that is originally used for taking down crops. If you're going out to pick stalks of grain, you might use that and swing that around, and it was very sharp, and it would cut as you were swinging it. There's also hand sickles where it's just big enough to fit in my hand, and you would go and grab the stalks of grain and then swipe underneath, and then you'd have a handful of grain. You would throw that into a pile and keep moving along. Those were the reapers. They were reaping whatever had grown there. So she just followed behind the reapers, and what she's doing is she's just looking for the leftovers, the extras. Now it tells us in verse 3, I love this phrase, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just so happened. That's a phrase that you and I use. It just so happens. Well, I don't know. It just happened like accidentally. This is what we're seeing here in verse 3 when it says that she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. When it says that she just so happened, what we're seeing on display here is the providence of God. That's Providence, if you're taking notes. Providence. Now, what does providence mean? Providence means that God has a plan that he is accomplishing behind the scenes. In other words, God didn't come out and say, listen, Ruth, I've got a plan here, and here's the plan, and, give it to her all written out on paper. As far as she knows, she's just going out to gather food, but behind the scenes, God is working and orchestrating these events. Okay? So this is the providence of God. And it says that she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. So she comes to the field that belongs to Boaz. Now, as our story develops, not necessarily in this chapter, but in chapter 3 and 4, what you and I will find out is that Boaz plays an extremely important part in this story. In fact, now I know that God can work out his plan however he chooses to work it out. But from a human perspective, from as far as you and I can see, if Ruth and Boaz do not ever meet one another, it's possible that Jesus would have never been born. Elimelech and Boaz, and what we will find out as I'm getting excited, I'm getting ahead of myself, but what we will find out during this story is that these people are going to end up related to a guy named Jesse. Jesse's going to have a son named David, right? David, Goliath, David. And then eventually Jesus comes through this family line, okay? But we'll get there eventually. So this didn't, even though it says, and she happened to come to the part of the field, no, this is the providence of God working behind the scenes. You and I, we benefit from the providence of God all of the time. You drive on the California freeways just like I do. And you probably, if you've been driving for any length of time, or you've been in your mom or dad's car, no doubt there have been times where you narrowly avoided an accident. If we were to say, okay, who's got a story about that? Probably everybody in here could go, yeah, one time we almost got in an accident and this happened, and cars were crashing, whatever, and we just narrowly avoided it. What you experienced was you benefited from the providence of God. He had a plan, and he had things that he was orchestrating, and he saved you, or he provided for you, in that way. And you didn't have a clue that it was God. You didn't see God out there on the freeway, but he was the one that was orchestrating and maneuvering and, working his plan. That's the providence of God. This is the providence of God. God is busy working. Now, we know that Boaz, he was of the family of Elimelech. Now, I want you to keep in mind that these things happen. What we're seeing develop here, as this story is developing, it starts with this woman, Ruth, meeting the needs. In other words, she was actively engaged in serving or working for her mother-in-law. She's not just feeding herself, she needs to feed her mother-in-law also. But it takes place as she is actively demonstrating her love to her mother-in-law. She wasn't sitting at home, rubbing her hands together and going, oh man, I hope, the genie drops some grain on us, or I hope, all of a sudden at the front door, the Amazon driver pulls up and says, hey, here's the grain that you ordered, or, here's some barking outside, and, go outside and there's a dog out there, with a bundle of barley or wheat on its back, hey, here's your food. She's not sitting around waiting. She goes, hey, I'm strong enough. I'm active. Let me get out there. Let me go work. And she does that. And what happens starts with her actively meeting the needs. Okay? Now, verse 4, we get another subpoint here. This is one of our subpoints. First, she's meeting the needs. And as she's actively meeting the needs, she meets Boaz. Now, what do we know about Boaz? Well, verse 1, it said, a man of great wealth. So he's got money. But he's also related to them through Elimelech. But let's look at Boaz now. Verse 4, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. He's the one that owns the field. And I love this. And he said to the reapers, the people that are out there working the field, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. Imagine that. Some of you have jobs. Can you imagine walking into your job, at Del Taco or the Krabby Patty or wherever it is that you work, and imagine your boss saying, hey, the Lord bless you. Wouldn't that blow your mind? Maybe some of you have Christian bosses, which is really cool, but for the most part the bosses are not. And but this boss is, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? He sees Ruth and he says, hey, he calls over his head reaper and he says, hey, who's that young lady out there? As he's looking at his field and looking at the workers, he goes, hey, who's that young lady? He didn't recognize her. Who's that? Now, what I've got here for you on the screen is, these are our subpoints, right? Our main point is gleaning. Then we've got a couple of subpoints. Well, let me give you some subpoints to that subpoint. Number 1, Boaz takes notice and inquires. This is a wonderful trait. He comes out, he recognizes there's somebody different out here, and then he asks, who is that? Who is that? So, verse 5, he asks, verse 6. So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, it is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And here's what the reaper goes on to say, verse 7. And she said, he's relaying the story, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Look what he says. So she came and has continued from morning until now. She's been out here all morning, though she rested a little in the house. He says she just rested a little bit, but she's out here working with us. It's a good quality. But Boaz takes notice and inquires. Now, in verses 8 and 9, let me give you another subpoint to our subpoint. Boaz takes initiative and instructs. Look at verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth. Now, it's a wonderful quality. May not seem like a big deal right now, but there's a relationship budding here in verse 8. This is brand new relationship. And who starts the relationship? It's Boaz. Boaz approaches this young lady. Boaz said to Ruth, You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Now, why does he call her my daughter? It is believed that he was older than Ruth. No idea how much older, but we believe that he was older. And so he refers to her as my daughter. You will listen, my daughter, will you not? You're going to listen to me, right? And then he goes on. Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. So he also had young women that were part of his workforce, his team out there. And he tells Ruth, listen, from now on, don't go anywhere else. Stay right here in my field. I want you to follow my workers. Stay with my young ladies. Verse 9, let your eyes be on the field which they reap. So watch where they go and go after them. Just follow behind them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? He says, I've already talked to the young guys. I told them, leave her alone. Let her do whatever she wants, essentially. And in the middle of verse 9, he says, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So what is Boaz saying to her? Boaz is saying, listen, I know your story. Don't go anywhere else. I want to bless you. I want to provide some food for you through this work. And also, if you need something to drink, I want you to feel free. Go over and get water whenever you want. Okay? He takes initiative and instructs. This is good. He's giving some clear instructions. I love this. We'll talk some more about these things at the end of our study. Let's move on to verse 10, where we see our third subpoint. So we've got 3 subpoints: meeting the needs, meeting Boaz, and making herself of no reputation. Making herself of no reputation. Well, I took that phrase from Philippians chapter 2, verse 7. In Philippians chapter 2 in the New Testament, Paul is speaking to the Philippians, and what he does in chapter 2 is he begins to talk about how Jesus was a servant, how he had a servant's heart. And one of the phrases that he uses is, Jesus made himself of no reputation. Now, I will help you to understand by explaining the opposite of that. You go, well, what is making yourself of no reputation? Well, let's think about social media. Many of us have social media. Now, the main goal of social media is to inform the world of my greatness. That's what we're doing, is we're self-promoting. I'm posting a picture or a video, or I'm sharing, part of my story, and I'm letting you know that I am the most interesting person in the world, and look at my new shoes, or look at my dog, or look at the beach that I'm at, or look at this food that I'm eating, or look at this ride that I'm on, or here's my family, or here's me in the pool, or here's my new bathing suit, or whatever it might be. What we're doing is we're informing the world that, listen, I am great, and you all need to recognize that. That's self-promotion. Okay, that's what we're doing. Making yourself of no reputation is the opposite of that. It means that you are humbling yourself, and you're not trying to call attention to yourself, and you're lowering yourself, not lifting yourself up, lowering yourself. Well, that's what she does in this section. Verse 10. Now, in response to what Boaz just said, so she fell on her face. Now, this is not a face plant like you and I were probably watching last night or this morning on our social media, watching somebody fall. Why do we enjoy watching people fall so much? Isn't that funny? And then watching them get hurt. I don't want to see anybody break bones. I don't like that. But just, if they fall and get hurt, why do I laugh at that so much? Why is that so funny? She didn't just fall on her face like she was dead. What this is indicating for us is that she bowed down. Look at the rest of verse 10. So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground. And she said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? What did she do? She made herself of no reputation. How? By going down on her face, bowing down to the ground. She asked him, why would you take notice of me? I'm a foreigner. I'm not even an Israelite. I'm a Moabite. And Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. I see all that you've sacrificed. And he goes on in verse 12 to say, the Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Acknowledging Boaz there, saying, hey, God's blessing you. Verse 13, here's her response. Remember, she's making herself of no reputation. Then she said to him, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. Oh, she can't call him Lord. Only the Lord is Lord. You can't call anybody but the Lord, Lord. Well, that's a lowercase L there. She's not referring to him as God, the way that Matt referred to me as God in the first service. But I don't want to bring it up and make him look bad, okay? Anyways, she refers to him as Lord here. But it's lowercase l. That's a title, a human title, for somebody that's in charge. And so she's calling him Lord. Okay? So then she said, verse 13, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. Now by saying my Lord, she's now saying, I'm yours. You know, I'm obeying you. I'm following your lead. And she goes on to say, for you have comforted me. How did he comfort her? By speaking to her and saying, listen, I know what you did. I'm aware. God bless you. You know, let me bless you. It was comforting to her. And so we're told there in verse 13, she says, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly. Now notice the word language she uses. You've spoken kindly to your maidservant. So now all of a sudden, I'm your servant. And the fact that she calls herself maidservant simply means that she's a female servant. I'm your servant. And then she goes on to say, though I am not like one of your maidservants. What? What does that mean? What she's doing is the same thing that Jesus did in Philippians chapter 2. She's lowering herself, then lowering herself again. She starts up here and she goes, hey, you're my Lord. Then she says, I'm just your maidservant. Lowers herself a little bit more. And then she lowers herself again by saying, but I'm not one of your regular, I'm not like one of your maidservants. What she's saying to Boaz is, I'm your servant, but I'm not even officially one of your servants. I'm lower than one of your servants. I'm just a Moabitess. I'm nothing, really. She's making herself of no reputation. We call this humility. Now, in verse 14, now Boaz said to her at mealtime, come here and eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. Come and get something to eat. So, what does she do? She lowered herself, made herself of no reputation. How does she do that? She sat beside the reapers. She didn't say, hey, Boaz, I think he likes me. I'm going to go sit next to him. She didn't wink at Boaz and say, hey, motion, like, can I come sit by you? She just stayed over with the field workers, with the reapers. She didn't move. And he's passing her bread and saying, hey, you know, let's keep it pure. You know, he's also not going, hey, baby, come on over here and sit next to me. He says, no, that's fine. You stay over there. I'll pass you some bread. And they pass bread. It's all out in the open. Everybody can see it. And so she sat beside the reapers in verse 14, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied. And then notice that little phrase at the end of verse 14, and kept some back. So she saved some of what he gave her, some of the food. Why did she save a little bit of the food? Anybody know why? Anybody want to take a wild guess? You feeling wild today and you just want to take a guess? What do you think? To take to Naomi. She's thinking. She's there. She's working. Been busy all morning. She's eating. She wants to take some back to Naomi. I like it. And when she rose up to glean in verse 15, so she gets up again. Lunch is over. Let's go back to work. Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Let her take whatever she wants. Also, look at this. I love this in verse 16. Also, let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. You see what now what we're seeing here from Boaz, that would be, just as an example, that's the providence of Boaz. In other words, Ruth has no idea. She's coming along and she goes, oh man, there's extra here. And she's finding extra. She doesn't know that Boaz orchestrated that. That's the providence of Boaz. He's working behind the scenes to orchestrate this. Now, if Boaz does that, you and I certainly can trust that God does that all the time. And again, we may find ourselves at certain times going, man, how did we escape that accident? Or how did we end up with extra money? Or how did we end up with, more food or more space or whatever? That's the providence of God. He's actively working to provide for us and bless us in ways that we're not aware of. He's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. He's behind the curtain. He's working and he's orchestrating what is going on, the events that are going on. Well, that's what Boaz is doing. Certainly God does that. If Boaz does that, certainly God does it. And look at verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Wait a minute. She had been out there all morning. She took a short break in the house. She stopped to eat. And now she's working again until evening. And she's not just working. It says that she gleaned in the field until evening and beat out what she had gleaned. And it was about an ephah of barley. In other words, not only did she pick the crops, but then she took it and she processed it, went through the work of beating it, grinding it into powder, basically, so that she could take that and be able to go back home and make bread or tortillas or whatever she was going to make. She's consistent, follows through, works hard. And we're told there that it was about an ephah of flour. How much is that? Well, an ephah is about a bushel. Okay, so what's a bushel? It is believed that this was about enough for the two of them, her and Naomi, to eat for about a week. That's quite a bit. That is quite a bit. Now, we move to our second and final main division, which is the good news. Let's see the good news here. The good news begins in verses 18 and 19 with her returning home. Then she took it up and went into the city. And her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. So she brought out and gave to her what she had kept back. There it is. What she had kept back, she gives to her after she had been satisfied. And in verse 19, her mother-in-law said to her, where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Now, before we move on to the next final section, do you remember, if you were here last week, do you remember Naomi? She was so discouraged. In fact, there were people from both services last Sunday who came up after and said, hey, I don't understand. Why did Naomi send Orpah, and she was going to send Ruth too, why did she send them back to Moab, knowing that there was idolatry going on there? Remember, she even said to Ruth, she goes, hey, listen, Orpah went back to her family and to her gods. Just go back to your family. Go back. And some of you were puzzled by that. Like, why would she just send her back to her foreign gods, those idols? Well, that's because that's the headspace that Naomi was in. She was so discouraged. She was telling people, hey, just get out of here. She was telling her daughters-in-law, just go back to your home and to your gods. God's against me. He doesn't like me. He took my husband. He took my two sons. I'm no good. Remember when she went back into town and they said, oh, Naomi, Pleasant. Her name was Pleasant. Oh, Pleasant, you're back. She goes, don't call me Pleasant anymore. Call me, does anybody remember? Mara, bitter. Don't call me Pleasant anymore. Call me bitter. God's against me. She tried to get Ruth to just go away. Just get out of here. I'm so discouraged. I'm depressed. You need to get away from me. Ruth said, no way, I'm following you. She goes, fine, just go ahead and follow me then. Remember all of that? Gone. One day of work. Gone. Verse 20 through 23, she has her faith restored. This is somewhat comical to me. Verse 20, then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be ye of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, this man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives, just like that. A little bit of bread. Oh, man, praise God. I know that some of us, sometimes we get so hungry. You'd be like, I'm starving. And then we even have a word for it. What's that word that we use when we're hungry and we're so hungry that we get angry? Hangry. We got a word for it, right? Because it's so common. Oh, I'm so hungry. You start getting grouchy at your mom and dad or your brother, your siblings, whatever. Get mad at your dog because your dog gets dog food, but you still don't have anything to eat, and you're just so angry, right? But then you get what? You get a cheeseburger or grilled cheese or something, and all of a sudden, oh, praise the Lord, bless the Lord, oh my soul. I was working one time with a guy, not at a church. This was before I started working at a church. And I did not know this guy. I had just met him, and we're working at the same recycling place. And it was my last day of work, actually, and the next day I was going to be starting work at the church, the other church in San Bernardino. And I'm talking to him, and we just met, and he's telling me like, oh man, dude, I got a headache, I got a hangover, man. Me and my friends, we were drinking last night, and we, drank this, beer or whiskey or whatever. He's telling me we were partying, he's like going on and on about how we were drinking so much. And then he goes, hey, so you're getting a new job? Where are you getting a job at? I said, I'm going to start working at my church. He goes, oh, praise the Lord. It's like, wait a minute. Just a minute ago, you were telling me about how drunk you were. But for some people, man, it's just like, oh, praise the Lord. Well, here's Naomi. She gets some bread back, and she's like, oh, blessed be the Lord. God's going to take care of us. Her faith is restored. And she says in verse 20, then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. God has blessed us, not just us who are still alive, but he's also blessing us and honoring my husband and our husbands, the dead. And Naomi said to her, this man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. Now, that's very important. We don't understand it yet, but we'll understand it later. And in verse 21, Ruth the Moabitess said, well, he also said to me, you shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. See, he had, Boaz had young women that were out there working also. And she says, no, this is good. Stay with his young women. And at the end of verse 22, and that people do not meet you in any other field. Stay in that field. Verse 23, so she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt or lived with her mother-in-law. So Naomi there at the end has her faith restored. Excellent. Now, we're almost done, but what I want to do is there's so much in this chapter that I've got a couple of lists that I want you to see. In this chapter, we have some godly characteristics displayed, and before we leave this, I need you to take notice of these characteristics, and we'll see some from Ruth, and we will see some from Boaz after. But let's look at Ruth first. What do we see on display here? Well, first of all, she's got a servant's heart. We see that in verse 2, because Ruth goes out to go and work the fields, right? What is she doing? She's not just trying to provide for herself, but she wants to feed her mother-in-law also, so she's got this servant's heart. Now, you might say that the rest of the things that I have listed for Ruth really are part of that servant's heart and not separate things, but I listed them as separate. But we can understand that a servant's heart is oftentimes going to have these same characteristics. And these characteristics, man, they might overlap one another, and they do oftentimes. But here's the next thing I noted. In verses 7 and 17, she was hard working. Remember, she started in the morning, took a small break in the house, came back out, worked until mealtime, and then after mealtime, she gets back up and she goes out to finish harvesting. And then what does she do at the end of the day? She beats what she brought, processes it all, carries that stuff home. She is hard working. What's the next thing? This is an obvious, but in verses 10, 13, and 14, we have examples of her humility. She falls on her face and bows down to the ground in front of Boaz. Why are you, why have I found favor in your eyes? I'm just a foreigner. She said in verse 13, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. You've spoken kindly to me. I'm just your maidservant, and I'm not even one of your official maidservants. And then in verse 14, I love that she sat beside the reapers at mealtime. She didn't go try to squeeze up and, get cozy with Boaz. She just stayed with the rest of the field workers, and there was bread passed over there. She was humble. She didn't say, you reapers, I'm not sitting with you dirty people. I'm going over there with Boaz. No, she just stays right where she's at. What's the next thing? Well, this is an obvious one. She was sacrificial. Verse 11, Boaz noted, hey, I know that you came with your mother-in-law. You left your family and your country, your home. You lost your husband. And now here you are, and you are wanting to bless your mother-in-law and provide for her. And he's like, hey, God bless you for doing that. She was sacrificial. She had left everything that she knew. What is the next thing? She was thoughtful, verses 14 and 18. In verse 14, she was done eating, and what did she do? She kept some back. For who? For her mother-in-law. She was thinking about her mother-in-law. And then when she got to, in verse 18, when she finally got back home, she didn't go, you know what? I'm kind of hungry. Naomi doesn't know I have that extra. I think I'll just take it into my room and, midnight snack. She doesn't do that. She brings it out and she gives it to her mother-in-law. She was thoughtful. Now, ladies, I want to encourage you to take a look at that. Hopefully you wrote those down. Servant's heart, hardworking, humble, sacrificial, thoughtful. These are characteristics on display. I mean, this woman, Ruth, Jesus has not been born into the world yet during this time, and yet she's already displaying Christ-like characteristics. These are characteristics that you want in your life. These are good and godly characteristics that you want to put on display, that you want to make sure, young ladies, that you're asking, God, would you please build these things, put these things in me. I want these things. Now, young men, you want to look at Boaz? Not yet. Because young men, what I want you to do is I want you to look at this list. Because young men, this is what you want as you begin to consider the opposite gender. And you begin to get into relationship, these are the things that you want to be looking for. Someone with a servant's heart who's hardworking and humble and sacrificial and thoughtful. You don't want a Kardashian. Do you notice what's missing from this list? Hotness. Where's that at? Now, this young lady, Ruth, she may have been hot. I don't know. But that's not one of the godly characteristics. These are the characteristics you want to be looking for as you consider a relationship and as you consider a wife. And you might go, well, I just want to date someone. I'm not ready to get married. You never know. You never know. You might just be going on a date and you might end up later on marrying that individual. Let's look at Boaz. And then we'll shut this thing down. What about Boaz? Boaz, we already said he's got godly characteristics, but I did list that as one of them. In verses 4 and 12, when he shows up to work, hey, the Lord be with you. And then in verse 12, he acknowledges, the Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. So he's acknowledging God. Remember that this is taking place during the time of Judges when there was no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. There were so many people that were not living in obedience to God, and yet this man Boaz during that time was. What's the next one? This is a big one, guys. Awareness. In verse 5, he shows up and he looks and he goes, hey, who's that lady over there? Awareness. That's one of the big complaints from the ladies. He's not aware of anything. He doesn't know what's going on. Awareness. You want to be aware. Whose woman is this? What's going on? We want to be aware of our surroundings, but of other people. We don't want to be selfish. What's the next one? Leadership. I love this one in verses 8 and 9. He says, hey, Ruth, nice to meet you. Here's what I want you to do. And he gives her some clear instructions. Good leadership, loving leadership. In fact, after he's done giving her that leadership, what does she say? Man, you've comforted me. That's what leadership should do. It should comfort you. Verse 11, he is caring. Verse 11. And Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me. He says, listen, I know what you've been doing for your mother-in-law, and I care, and I'm going to help you provide for your mother-in-law. And then lastly, in verse 14, actually verses 14 through 16, he's providing. What does he do? He orchestrates. He says, listen, men of the field, I want you to, make sure that she's got enough, plenty to take home. Leave some extra, make sure some falls out. He's providing. Now, guys, you want to look at this list, and you want to do the same thing. You want to go, you know what? God, I need these in my life. I want to acknowledge you and be committed to you. I want to be aware. I want to be a good, strong, biblical servant leader. I want to be caring. I want to be providing. But we'll do the same thing, ladies. Look at the list. Because this is what you want in a future husband. This is what you want in a relationship. Not somebody who's there to serve themselves and get what they can from you, but somebody that wants to serve and give. And do you notice, ladies, what's missing from this? Hotness. Where's the big muscles? Where's the big muscles and tattoos? Where's that at? Well, that's neither here nor there. That's whatever. These are the godly characteristics you're looking for. Now, it might be that guys and girls, as you look at these lists, you might say, God, would you please provide somebody for me like that? A woman like Ruth or a man like Boaz? And you might say, would you please provide someone like that? Lord, I want those characteristics, but could you also make them hot? That's okay. If they're hot or they got big muscles or whatever, but the characteristics that we listed here, those are the main things that you want. And I'll tell you why. You ready? I'll tell you anyways. Because the hotness, the big muscles, gravity kicks in. And those big muscles that used to be up here, one of these days are going to end up at the waistline. And that guy that oh man, he's so cute, he's going to need a bigger belt. The panza grows and grows and grows. That's what happens. And the same thing with the ladies. The beauty is there. But over time it fades. That's how it happens. All of us get older. So you don't want to be fixed on those things. Somebody's good looking, fantastic. That's wonderful. Nothing wrong with that at all. But these characteristics that we listed here, these are the things that we want to focus on. These are the things that we want to ask God for. God, make me this, or God, provide this for me in an individual. And if you're a young lady, you want to say, God, make me a Ruth and send me a Boaz. And if you're a guy, you want to say, God, make me a Boaz and send me a Ruth. Because see, you don't want to have this list up here. Where are we at? Look at that list. You don't want to say, God, send me this kind of woman. And then God come back like, I would, man, but you're a bum. I got somebody like that, but I'm not giving her to you. You want to be a Boaz. You want to have all the godly characteristics that match this. Friday, we've got something.